In Florence, exactly in 1469, a boy was born who would be criticized and humiliated but would change all Western thinking about politics. His name is Nicolás Machiavelli, for some, a failed politician, but we will evaluate him through one of his most prominent works, The Prince. As this work suggests, there are always actions that may seem morally right but can actually lead to disaster, and others that may seem wrong but can provide security and success for centuries. The Prince has been banned and vilified, described as a manual for demons, a guide to tyranny, and it was even said that it corrupts anyone who reads it. This book was written by the Italian diplomat and philosopher Nicolás Machiavelli, and constitutes a political exploration of human nature, and a guide for nobles on how to maintain their power over the masses they control. Machiavelli tries to reveal how the world of politics and power truly works, and today we are going to delve into its pages to draw lessons for our daily lives. We will discover why virtuous people can be ineffective in government, how cruelty can have benefits, and how we are all a little less moral than we thought. It is important to remember that this book was aimed at the rulers of principalities, that is, aristocratic leaders, rather than the leaders of democracies. Furthermore, this explanation does not imply an endorsement of all the ideas presented in it. First, to go deeper. Why this book has acquired such a negative reputation, this is our first point and Machiavelli's first lesson for all of us. The fall of idealism and the moralistic fallacy is an irrational thinking error in which we assume the world is a certain way because we believe it should be like this. If you are ever surprised by human behavior simply because it seems very wrong, then you have fallen into the clutches of this fallacy. According to Machiavelli, the reality is that people commit terrible, cunning and villainous actions all the time, and he is here to remove the blindfold and show us the world as it is. Before Machiavelli, much had been written on the subject of government, but much of it was the work of philosophers discussing how to be a moral ruler, or how to be a good citizen. For example, Aristotle's Politics focuses heavily on issues of virtuous government and how to run states to promote human flourishing. However, Machiavelli did not agree with this at all. The Prince aims to help rulers achieve and maintain power. For Machiavelli, there was a fundamental problem with all this moral reasoning about how to be a virtuous ruler, and that is that most people are simply not virtuous. He is not judging them, he is simply expressing what he sees as a basic fact about the world. According to Machiavelli, by nature, people are disloyal, seek their own benefit, and will be willing to carry out any immoral or amoral act they consider appropriate at the moment, justifying it later with twisted ethical reasoning. In a world like this, a ruler who only cares about the color of his own soul would be devoured and soon lose power. Machiavelli is clear at this point. Being a good person is simply not enough to be a stable and secure ruler. Sometimes for both a ruler and his citizens to be stable and secure, it is better than being good. Machiavelli witnessed the turbulent times in Italy where city-states rose and fell, governments crumbled, and massacres were common. He knew firsthand the reality that it was often preferable to have an unscrupulous ruler who maintained and secured his state than a virtuous one who could be easily manipulated by foreign powers and would quickly end up invaded, with his most sacred people and army annihilated. This is why he insists in this first lesson, discarding any idealism about how the world should be. Machiavelli recognizes the existence of virtuous people and in fact suggests that it is beneficial to surround yourself with them if you are lucky enough to find them. However, he emphasizes that it is wiser to adopt a pessimistic view of human nature and prepare for the worst. It is preferable to be pleasantly surprised by the virtuous actions of some individuals than to be naively optimistic and face disastrous consequences. Machiavelli suggests that rulers should break previous pacts with their allies since these allies would likely betray them if it ever suits them. He recommends instilling fear in both subjects and other states by arguing that love and loyalty are ephemeral, while fear takes root deeply in the human heart, ensuring its fidelity in difficult times. He affirms that one should worry more about appearing good than about being truly good, since according to him, this is the norm followed by the majority. This mentality is part of what has given Machiavelli the reputation of being a ruthless strategist willing to resort to any means necessary to achieve his goals, regardless of honesty, morality, or the consequences for others. Machiavelli held the belief that behind every mask we show to the world is a dark and sometimes complex part of our nature that we often prefer to ignore or deny. This idea is connected to what the Swiss psychologist and essayist Carl Jung called the shadow, referring to those unconscious facets of our personality that we tend to hide from others. Machiavelli suggests some morally questionable behaviors, but it is crucial to understand his reasoning behind them. From his perspective, politics is a ruthless terrain, and if you are so focused on being virtuous that you lose track, and that virtue prevents you from making the unpleasant decisions that sometimes a leader must take to maintain his power, then you are likely to be replaced by another ruler, possibly one even worse than you. I personally tend to have a slightly more hopeful perspective on human nature compared to Machiavelli. However, I admit there is some truth in his observations. Wherever we go, we are likely to find individuals willing to do whatever is necessary to achieve their goals. Recognizing this reality allows us to be prepared to handle those situations with the required firmness. We may not face decisions as extreme as those Machiavelli describes, but we could find ourselves in circumstances where we have to sacrifice certain moral principles for the general well-being. For example, he states that we cannot be competent or kind in all aspects of life. This limitation is not only due to our abilities and limited resources but also to the conflicts between different moral codes. In some areas of our life, such as politics, business, or family, we may face what we could call difficult decisions. Sometimes we might have to give up our ideas of altruistic kindness for the sake of practical efficiency. We may be forced to tell lies to maintain a stable relationship, or we may have to overlook the feelings of certain employees to keep the business running smoothly. According to Machiavelli, this is the price we must pay for dealing with the world as it is rather than as we would like it to be. Something that personally draws my attention to Machiavelli is what he considers fundamental in a leader: standing out as a potential dictator despite spending much of his life working as a diplomat for his home state of Florence. And because he respects power and competition above all else, it is tempting to see this as just a symptom of his supposed psychopathy. But there is much more to Machiavelli's admiration for the powerful than meets the eye. Machiavelli's view points out a truth that is obvious but often not recognized, and that is that we need power to achieve anything. In his opinion, there is no greater goal for which a ruler should strive than personal power. This did not necessarily mean that the leader should enrich himself at the expense of his people. If it is relatively easy for a foreign state to bypass your defenses, cut off your head, and completely replace your government, then Machiavelli recommends building the independent military force of your state, and says that to do this you shouldn't use mercenaries but your own citizens. He points out that the people who defend their homes are going to fight much harder against the invaders, while the mercenaries are known to flee at the first real sign of danger. But what is all this power for? It's not simply out of lust for control but to ensure the self-sufficiency of both you and your state. Self-sufficiency will not only ensure the respect of neighboring states, preventing you from being invaded, but also the fear and admiration of your subjects. I can't help but draw some parallels with this idea of self-sufficiency and wisdom that other philosophers have given about our daily lives. One of the most determining Stoic principles is to strengthen the ability to find happiness within oneself. Seneca once encouraged people to give up all their possessions and loved ones to live in nature for a while, just to show that their happiness was completely independent. This would not only gain the respect of others, as they can't help but admire someone who does not depend on anything for their well-being, but it would also strengthen your self-esteem. This last point may be the most valuable since, although we can distance ourselves from those who hate and belittle us, if we do not respect ourselves, there will always be a voice in our head that tells us we are worthless. Machiavelli advises us all to ensure our independence from external forces, whether through external power or internal dominion. But the most unfortunate part of Machiavelli's advice is perhaps his suggestion that sometimes a leader must be cruel or harsh for the good of his government, and that is what we will explore below. What image comes to mind when you think of a cruel leader? Perhaps you think of unimaginable atrocities and the continuous exploitation of the dominated. To Machiavelli, cruelty applied correctly is not about that but rather about the careful management of fear in your subjects. As we have discussed, Machiavelli does not trust people to be loyal out of love or gratitude. Gratitude is easily forgotten and quickly disappears with the smallest insult or issue, while fear remains deeply ingrained in people. Therefore, according to him, it is wiser to rule through fear. However, there is a nuance here. Cruelty applied at once, and with a clear end goal, is preferable to cruelty spread over time. If you act harshly but resolve the situation quickly, people will soon forget and remember more the benefits that arose from your actions than the suffering endured. But if you act cruelly continuously, it will only bring resentment, as the people will not see the end of the suffering or understand its purpose. Machiavelli's advice is extremely controversial, especially in our current era where morality is increasingly emphasized. But he is not necessarily suggesting that we should all act cruelly or embrace ruthless behavior. but rather that sometimes the ends justify the means. If it comes to maintaining order, security and stability, then it may be justified to be harsh when necessary. In conclusion, Machiavelli provides us with valuable lessons for our lives whether or not we agree with his views. He invites us to confront reality with a clear mind, avoid the naive idealism that distorts our perception of the world, and recognize that power and control are essential for achieving our goals. Although his perspective on cruelty and fear is controversial, it is useful to understand the complexities of human behavior and the need for practical solutions in the face of difficult situations. Ultimately, we can all find some truth in Machiavelli's observations, even if we do not embrace all of his recommendations. The importance of being prepared for the worst, understanding the nature of power, and managing our behavior accordingly are lessons that can serve us well in navigating the complexities of life and achieving our personal and professional goals.